Yeah, I like it.
Is it all?
Do you need the cue, the clicker?
For
I don't think so, 'cause
Amsterdam?
I'm not doing
Just
anything
like
like
really
Primarily,
hyperlocal?
yeah, primarily, absolutely.
Yeah.
I might sit a bit around, actually, so I can see
That's
you
nice
all.
as well.
No, it is nice, and it's very diverse, and we speak to so many different.
It's now.
Okay. I'm just checking. Okay, yes, everyone can hear. Hello, welcome to this session on hotel sustainability data. Today we're talking about data and who cares wins, which sounds a little bit like a competition, but it's not actually. What we're going to try and discuss today is how data and sustainability for hotels can help them win, but not lose. So it's not a competition. It's about looking at strategy, looking at operations, and then looking at some of the challenges that hotels will face using sustainability data along the way. I'm joined by a fantastic set of people. I've got Bryan here from Studio Moren. I've got Sarah from Thrust Carbon, Joe from Good & Co, and Thijs from the Green Hotel Club.
Hi.
So we're going to spend about 15 minutes on each section, and then at the end, hopefully, we've got a couple of minutes to have some questions from you guys if you want to. I'm going to start with the question, why should hotels care about their sustainability data? Sarah?
Yeah, I think hotels should care about sustainability data, not because of all of the horrible sticks that are out there to beat you with, but because of the positive reasons. The new sort of travelers, new generation, the revenue that you could generate by having a conscious business, and really sort of the costs that you could save by having a look at energy, water usage. I would just say you should care because you could make a little bit more money by having the right fit for your business and your target audience, but you can also save a little bit more money by just looking at ways to reduce on energy usage.
Great. And do you think that comes down to strategy? So Joe, like if you were to go into a hotel and say you need to sort out your strategy, but you need data to do that, do you think a sustainability strategy needs that data, or can you just have a strategy without it?
Yeah, absolutely. The strategy, as you'll probably know, is about thinking, planning, and then doing and executing. And now, at this point in 2024, we really have to think. We have to think about how our businesses and our hotels are having an impact on people and planet, and how we can change that into being a positive impact. So strategy, we have to start somewhere. If we're making a strategy with really clear data points that we have already, great, then we're going to have a stronger strategy that aligns with our business strategy. However, it is possible to start with zero data and just create a vision and say, this is what we want to do to be a more sustainable hotel and to have more positive impact, and just get going, get on with it. And then the data piece fits in and it can come.
So it's not too late to start if people haven't started yet
No,
with their
absolutely
strategy?
not.
No. Bryan, what are your thoughts on strategy when it comes to data?
Well, I mean, I'm coming here from the architecture and interior design world. And so I'm mostly having conversations about what the sustainability reporting requirements are. And where to begin is usually the question that everyone's asking. What do I have to do first? Do I just look at my operation? Do I look at the vision for the hotel, what the brand wants to be? And I think when you don't know the way forward, and you're wondering if you need to onboard someone to teach you or if you need to learn yourself, I think you just need to remember that none of this is novel, none of this is new. It's all based on guest experience. So if we step back, think about what it is we want to provide, what do people like, that I think is a really good basis, analog, if you're not ready to start with the digital basis for your sustainability strategy, to start building your vision on.
So, I mean, that brings us to the question about what actually is the data that people are collecting and what's important. And Thijs, do you have any ideas of what you think is going to be important for a hotel to collect, and how, and who does that? Who's responsible for that?
In terms of the data collection,
Yeah.
There's different sort of seniority when you look at the different hotel chains and hotel businesses in how they treat the data collection or how they treat sustainability to begin with. And I think if you are able as an organization to identify an individual and make that person or that department responsible for the data collection and for then the execution of the strategy, of making the strategy and then the execution of the strategy, you'll get there. But I think that's where you need to head. You need to make someone in a department responsible for it.
Do you think hotels have the resources for that? Anyone?
In terms of people,
Making someone responsible for that.
it's the problem is if you don't, it's very hard to firstly create the strategy and then look back and see whether you've actually achieved what you were meant to achieve.
What do you think, Bryan?
Well, I think with Thijs, what comes to mind with what I just heard you say, Thijs, is that I'm just going to keep saying this, sustainability isn't new. There's an intensification of being seen to be engaging with sustainability more visibly, okay? So, in that moment, what was the question?
Well, I was actually going to, it's not new, so I was thinking about CSRD because people are going to have to do that, aren't they?
That's it, that's where I was headed with this. We are now, because of this intensification, in a culture of reporting, okay? Whether it's financial reporting, or if you have a development, a building, and you have to get BREEAM, or WELL, or LEED, you are reporting one way or another, whether it's a local authority asking for something, whether it's building control asking for something, whether it's accountants. So part of the intensification of sustainability reporting, or just the era that we're living in now, is adopting a culture of reporting. And if you don't know how to report or what to report on, just start gathering evidence. Here's a task. File your utility bills in a way that someone will find them without having to ask you where you put them. If you can start doing these little things, then you're adopting a culture of gathering evidence in a way that is helpful not just to yourself, but to a team. I think that's critical.
Yeah,
Felicity,
that's
is
true.
it okay if I could just quickly respond, because I completely agree with Bryan, and the reporting is a vital element, and at the same time what we see now, and this it's a pivotal, not pivotal, but it's a crucial moment where we see in EU legislation that there's quite some legislation sort of on the brink of, is it going, is it falling, is it going, is it falling, and so and the elections are up also. In the EU. So what you see, for example, the industry-specific CSRD is not final yet. There is the nature reserve legislation, let's say, that has now also been sort of minimized, marginalized. There's quite some EU legislation that is uncertain. So the problem that, as a result of that, although 100% the CSRD and all the different reportings, the reporting structures that are coming are important, at the same time, there is a responsibility for businesses individually, regardless of whether they have to or not, from a legislation perspective, from a legal perspective,
Well,
that
there's
they need to choose.
a moral reason
Yeah,
to do it.
yeah, and so it's tough, it's tricky, and we see in the elections in Portugal, they in the direction that they went. So it's an interesting time and a pivotal time now in the EU, specifically. What direction are we taking with each other, regardless of what the law states, let's say?
So really, you are agreeing with Bryan because we do just need to collect data.
Yeah.
And we need to start then doing something with it.
Yeah.
I think that's the next thing, isn't it, Sarah? There's no point collecting it. You've actually got to know what to do with it next. How would you help? Like, what would you say to a hotel who was struggling with that kind of leap from having it to doing something with it?
Yeah, I mean, ask the people who are going to need the data how it should be presented. So there might be people like an auditor, for example, who is interested in seeing the information that you're presenting, but maybe they're interested in seeing it in its raw format so that they can take it and apply a carbon methodology to it. So it's not that you really have to do that much with it. Somebody's going to come down and tell you, hey, I need this information. I need to understand what your ESG strategy is for this year. I need to understand, what your building certificates look like. So I think just, yes, having it in one place, but it isn't just about that quantitative data. Also, keep a record of what you're doing qualitatively. What are you doing for your community? What are you doing to help the sort of overarching, the traveler, the guest, the experience that they have, and do they feel socially like they're responsible by staying at your property? If you have all of that in one place, the people who want that data will let you know how to present it to them.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, introducing the social aspect of data, because we often talk about just the environmental side of ESG. And I think that brings me on to the operational side of hotels when we talk about sustainability. Thijs, you'll be a good one for this, I think.
Let's see.
With hotels, and what sort of tools would they have that could help them collect their sustainability data? Obviously, you have like the food waste tools, like Orbis and Winnow.
Yeah, there's different.
What else is there?
Well, again, I thought it was very interesting what you. Practically, there's a lot. In food waste, there's Orbis, there's Winnow, there's different tools, AI-driven, that are very helpful and very insightful, and businesses can easily adopt them. It's paramount that it's then monitored properly, and that you then also allow those same resources that are difficult to find sometimes, but create space and time for these people to then monitor the progress or how it's going. But the hardest part is social. The hardest part is the soft elements. The hardest part is creating the environment of this, then let's say, social inclusion or diversity or equivalence. I like to call it equivalence rather than equality. And that's difficult, and that's really a culture, an atmosphere that you create, and that is the only way you can do that is by agreeing on C-level how you want to do that.
Well, that's
and
what I
I
was
think
going to say with Joe, actually.
Yeah,
I was going to ask Joe,
yeah, absolutely.
From that point of view, you have to have everyone on board from the brand, maybe if it's a franchise, the owner. How does that work if you're trying to kind of filtrate down through the system to get the social side of data?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you said you filter down, because actually sometimes this is a bottom-up thing as well, and your employees are a huge stakeholder group, and especially now with the consciousness of the younger generation of employees that are coming through, especially in hospitalities, is often staffed by younger people who are very socially conscious now and socially aware, and if something's not right, they're going to tell you. Your employer brand is strengthened by thinking about your sustainability data from the E, the S and the G, and to be able to retain those really good socially conscious employees. A lot is going to be a lot of push up to say, management team, come on, let's get on with this. And obviously it's great if you're a visionary leader and you've been thinking about sustainability for a long time, and you can bring that into your organization. And we have a couple of clients who are very sustainably minded, one from the more restoration side, but also somebody from the more social impact side as well. And they're pushing, for their accreditations, they're pushing for B Corp. They know that these third-party badges which show that they are doing good and continuing to do good and changing their governance are really important, because they help the strategy, but they also help the operations, because at every single meeting, how are we, looking back at our vision and our B Corp accreditation is so important. But a lot of your stakeholder groups for the hotels, from the employees, but also your guests. You have now a whole tranche of guests who are looking for brands that they can feel comfortable with, because they know they're doing the right thing. So Sarah, when you're talking about how you'll be told how you want to communicate, if you're not communicating well to your guests about what you're doing and why you're taking certain actions, then again you're going to be struggling, because that communications part is so intrinsic to your reputation, but communicating the right data points to those guests as well. There's a great hotel in London in Aldgate East which is doing this really well, and when you walk into the room at Hyatt City East, you know why you're going to be turning that light off, or you know that they are putting everything in place to make sure that your stay is as sustainable as possible. And we see this now with more brands who are thinking about the whole range of stakeholders and how they want to be communicated with, and not just from legislation, but from feeling you're doing well and making sure that you're doing the right thing for business.
I've just that's a really good point when you actually get the guests involved in the whole process, because that's obviously what matters. And I've just stayed at the Social Hub in Amsterdam City, and I had a shower and it was telling me how many litres of water I was using. I had a very quick shower because I felt bad. And it has a little polar bear with a melting ice block. And I just think to be able to see that, so that's like on that side of it. You mentioned sustainability, like accreditations. Should hotels go for that, Bryan?
Well, that's a tough one.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's tough because accreditations have boundaries. They have regions. And one that's accepted by one accreditation agency, someone else might be looking for a different one. But this goes back to, are you just, I'll call it best practice. Are you providing a well-rounded experience? Are you treating your staff properly? Are you providing the correct amenities, not just for the people you expect to stay at your hotels, but for the community that it's in? Because the whole thing about social is that before sustainability became something we have to do in the last few years, hotels have had the S in ESG, I think, kind of automatically, okay? Because countless hotel stories of someone starting as a chambermaid, becoming a general manager, having a career, right? And hotels don't just land from outer space, I don't think, unless that's the concept. So they have to fit into a community. And in the last 10 years at least, you can't have a hotel in an urban environment without a publicly accessible ground floor. And so this goes back to just to the accreditation point. You're already doing this if you're a hotelier. It's now time to start talking about it. It's now time to keep a diary saying, today, like every day, we did something that can be quantified as S for reporting purposes. Okay, now you talk about data points, and I recoil, because I just want to say, just tell people what you're doing, let them feed back, but obviously there's going to be kind of guidelines and terminology that we're all going to have to get accustomed to. So
But
accreditations, they're important.
Yeah. We do need alignment.
Harmonization is the word for all these acronyms for financial reporting, isn't it?
What are your thoughts, Sarah?
I really struggle sometimes with accreditations just because I do sometimes feel like they can be a green stamp on what is not necessarily a well thought through strategy. And when you can get an accreditation by paying a certain amount of money, are you really saying anything about your ESG or sustainability strategy? So I do say, just be a little careful about what accreditation you're going for. That standardization and harmonization hasn't happened yet across regions. So if you're going to do something that is to that standard, try and make sure that you're going through the motions in the right way. And I think sometimes hoteliers are a little bit worried about the data point side, because what if my data doesn't necessarily paint the right picture? What if maybe this accreditation has, I don't know, some bad press? But actually, I still think being as transparent as possible about what you're trying to do or what you're looking to achieve in the future, and just put that information and data out there, regardless of how it might look.
I think that's a good example of how, if you hear about carbon offsetting and paying some distant country to plant a tree, well, have you checked in on that tree after it was planted? Is it still alive 10 weeks from now, 1 year from now? So it doesn't take a lot to kind of start raising questions about the quality of these programs. And I think that goes back to, if you're thinking about sustainable reporting or data as bolt-ons or extra to what you do on a daily basis, you're going to get caught out this way. So if you think back to how we did it before the internet, how could there possibly have been a hospitality sector without data in the past, right? It's human intuition, it's human observation, it's understanding people, and bringing that to the front of mind when you're faced with whether it's a funder or an accreditation company asking for evidence.
I saw you raising an eyebrow there, Thijs. Do you have anything
not necessarily raising an eyebrow. No, it's more to add to it. And I think, look, ultimately, hotels are in it for, it's a business, right? Part of their business is large groups of people visiting, having meetings, staying over, I don't know, a Nike European sales meeting of 200 people. And one of the difficulties is, yes, it's an intrinsic motivation for organizations to do the right thing or to do well. At the same time, there is a legislative need to report your results properly. And one of the difficulties is, at the moment, there is the Green Claims Directive, for example, that's still stuck in the, here I am again with my EU. But the problem is, because there isn't, thank you, because there isn't, at the moment, there isn't a clear directive as to where hotels need to adhere to, that makes it very difficult for other companies to check on what is done in what way and how can we control that, and how, and this is maybe most important, how can consumers see whether those claims are right and whether they are correct. And yes, there is the moral, yes, there is to do the right thing, but consumers, rightfully so, demand a certain sort of certification or an idea of what does this mean, what does this certificate mean, and what does it do. That requires data. That requires...
And it will line up with the financial side of things, because hotels won't be able to get investment unless they are also collecting this data in the future. So it is really important that they do start. I think a lot of what we've been saying, it sounds hard, but I think one of the things we've been talking about before was it's actually very simple. You can read your electricity bill. That's data, isn't it? These are simple things.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is that hotels have done so much, even in the last few years, have had to adapt and been through so many change management processes, some of which have been policy-led through COVID and all of that kind of thing, but also some of which are just, you have to continually change and move with the times and move with what's going on in your locality, but also with what the guest is demanding as a property. You're not just a static building that always stays the same for 50 years, and if you are, well, congratulations. But most people are constantly iterating their strategy, constantly looking at their business plans, and now sustainability, there's a big light and a shine on it. We have to build that in to the way all the departments are working and start thinking about that in every business conversation. So how does a hotel go through that change management process? You do it exactly the same way you've done all of the other change management processes that you're, as GMs and as management teams, really successful at. So you know you can do it. You should have confidence to be able to do it. This is just another element that we have to think about now because the sands of time are running out quickly, and we have, especially on the environmental side, we have to start making more positive impact.
I think we were talking earlier about how maybe smaller and independent hotels have a big opportunity here to take the lead. I think one of us was saying, I can't remember, maybe it was you, Bryan, that the big hotels are just going to they're not going to do anything different. They're not going to change until someone else does it first.
Oh,
Do you remember that?
Well, I just have this understanding of the world that the more market share you have, the less there's pressure on you to change your ways. Unless there's a challenger who's doing something and gaining traction and getting press, and it all of a sudden becomes something you're interested in exploring. And now, that's not to be unfair to the big brands. The big brands have enormous supply chains, and one little change can have more than ripple effects around the world in terms of waste reduction, for example. Mm-hmm. Think about in the 90s when I think it was Delta Airlines that took one peanut out of every bag and saved millions. But there were still plenty of peanuts in every bag. So the large brands have a huge opportunity here. Not to rock their boat too much, to mess with their successful equation, but to see what they can fine-tune. Whereas the independents have all the opportunity. It's not like you have the economy of scales that the large brands have. So I think there's a larger envelope of opportunity within the supply chain that's available to you to see if you can reduce your plate sizes, for example. Mm-hmm. Maybe get a building monitoring system so that you can understand occupancy of your rooms in real time, or water use or energy use on a room basis and things like that. And the more it helps you, the more you'll tell people, and the more the big brands are going to find out. And it's this kind of ecosystem effect.
That's really interesting. Do you agree, Sarah?
I don't know. I do agree I think there is a huge opportunity. However, the big brands are very vocal with regards to environmental and ESG. They have these big reports that they produce. The company that I work for is a sustainability intelligence company, which pushes hospitality sustainability data into online booking tools for big corporates like a Nike, for example. And if those independent hotels aren't submitting their data to HCMI, aren't telling you what you're doing to reduce the plate sizes, then when you look at an online booking tool and you're looking for what the most sustainable property is, those chains are going to come up top because they're the ones that are exposing the data and exposing the information. And I feel like the smaller brands and the independent hotels have this opportunity, but I think there's a hesitancy to expose that information. And I just really encourage transparency in order to seize that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a good point. And talking about the booking tools, Sarah, with when they have the green leaf or whatever, what is that? What's behind that green leaf?
Good
what
question.
Data is behind that?
It depends. So I come from the corporate travel world, and in the corporate travel world, it could literally be anything. It could be one ESG certification that you purchased online, or it could be something all the way up until the entire property from the ground up is built with hospitality in mind. We at Thrust Carbon have a hotel sustainability index, which where we take the qualitative information plus the carbon information and give them a score out of 100. And we push that into online booking tools for corporates to book. But we can't give you a better score without the data. And that's where, and also the certifications are only one part of the puzzle. So a hotel here in the Netherlands is obviously going to be better carbon than a hotel, for example, in China. But what about all of the sort of, like we said, the ESG side of things? So putting those two together and giving them a score gives there a little bit more of an understanding of what hotels are most sustainable. But again, no one's going to really know what you're doing unless you tell them.
Yeah, so there's still a bit of a blurry line about what is a green hotel when it comes to booking something then.
No one really knows.
No.
And that's where we've got to get some harmonization and standardization in this industry. And the more data that is available, the better.
Sure, okay. I think that was the operations part. Let me just check our time. Yeah, actually, bang on time. So we're going to move on to the challenges. So we've discussed strategy and operations, but then what's stopping people? What is, excuse me, what's stopping hotels from actually implementing these things? And is it possible to not do anything, or will you just disappear? Who wants to take that?
I think, well, I can take that on. I think if you're not going to do anything at all with sustainability, then you will disappear, or you'll be swallowed up, or you will not have corporate guests, or you will not be able to attract a certain demographic that you would like, and your business changes because you were refusing to change. So I think there is, people are going to change. Hopefully everybody here is thinking about the sustainability issues and thinking about how they can change their business tomorrow. But yeah, it's tricky. It's a massive challenge, because how do you resource that when, especially, you're an independent, you're a small team, and you referred earlier to like the big corporates. That's where they can say, okay, we now have a sustainability department, and this is how we're going to have focus, and we can chuck another like F5 FTE on here. You can't do that when you're an independent hotel. You can't do that when you're a smaller cluster group. You have to think about where those like costs and benefits and resources are going to come from. And you might have investors that are like, well, come on guys, you just need to hit your bottom line. And it's how do you communicate with those stakeholders and bring them on board so that you can create those roles and those responsibilities so that you can move forward in this space. It is a massive challenge, the resourcing.
So it's a challenge, but they have to find someone who is doing the sustainability data, whether that's adding on to an HR role or whatever.
Or a comms role, and I've seen it now in so many departments. Sometimes it's sitting with comms because they want the communications to be strong around sustainability. Sometimes it's sitting with finance because they want it to align with CSRD or the new requirements coming up. So where it sits in your organisation doesn't particularly matter, because that person, that individual, is going to have to work transversely across the organisation, across the hotel. So it needs to sit somewhere with somebody or with a cluster of people, or maybe you need an internal board, maybe you need a different way of structuring it. So it doesn't sit just with one person, but you have a regular process that's brought in, like you would to report on your sales forecast or your financial data.
Thijs?
Well, yeah, and I think additional, it's also, besides from a guest perspective, from a staff's perspective, you're not going to get the people if you're not going to get into it. Younger generations are just not going to be interested in working for you, with you, for you, regardless of how you want to call it. They don't want to. They don't want to be in an environment where work environment then where there is a hyper-competitive atmosphere. They don't want to work with a chef who doesn't care about seasonality, who doesn't care about food waste. They don't want to work with, with managers who don't care about an inclusive work environment. They just don't want to. Very simple. And right, if your brand doesn't portray that type of messages, you're just gonna slowly but surely, you're gonna just disappear.
Well, with the hospitality industry and the turnover of staff and retention, then that's a key point, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You are going to fail unless you become more socially.
And I mean, we see it now. We see it happening. We see it with businesses, and with the Green Hotel Club, we also have some different municipal bodies and governmental bodies in the group, and we see it with other hotels struggling to get staff and hotels not struggling to get staff. The difference is how do they come across towards the workforce? The social hub, for example, is a hotel business that is doing phenomenally well attracting new people. More traditional brands are having a much harder time to find people. I mean, it's right there. It's not some theoretical idea.
This is a good example of something that doesn't necessarily have to do with what those successful, the hotels that are having an easier time finding staff are doing in terms of sustainability. If you back up for a second, I wonder if it's the ones having an easier time finding staff have a workplace culture that they care about and that they try to improve, and the other ones might not on the same scale. And then just write that down. How many local jobs have you created? You know, talk about the kind of the staff benefits and things like that. Cool. So you already have something in place. That's the point here. Now, what's the word? Exploit it. You know, in a narrative form or a data point form for whoever's asking for that evidence. Because if you care about your workplace culture, then you already have evidence for your ESG reporting.
I take a different approach to this challenge. One, probably a little bit more practical. What I see with independent hotels is the biggest source of your carbon emissions as a hotel is usually your energy, so your gas and electricity, basically. That's the biggest source. And a lot of times, the lovely character that you love about that independent hotel is part of the reason why they're spending so much energy. So I find the biggest challenge for independent hotels is retaining that charm and character whilst also trying to get double glazing so that you spend less money on the actual energy side. So one of the things that we've done at Press Carbon is obviously we've gone through and tried to take into consideration some of the charm and some of the maybe grade 2 listed features that you don't want to change or you can't change, and not penalizing independent hotels for that. There's very interesting ways for you to mitigate some of those, but I think that's the biggest challenge is how do you retain that individual and independent spirit of the property whilst also keeping the energy bills low.
That's good. I mean, Bryan,
Well, that's very important to me because if anyone here is worried about reducing your carbon footprint, whether it's if you're building something or operating a building, all I have to say to you is that your favorite food is carbon, your favorite film is carbon, your favorite car, your favorite clothes, all of human experience is carbon-based. So if you're just trying to optimize the mathematics, are you doing that at the expense of not just a guest experience, but a human experience? Okay, and so we do have to bring our knowledge of the world to a sustainability reporting framework. We probably should be in a position to push back and say that I know you want me to reduce this, that, and the other, but if we do that, then something else will suffer. But that means that you have to get stuck in and engage with the topics. You don't have to become experts, but if you're not familiar with the terminology involved in net zero, get familiar with the terminology. Over time, you'll meet people, you will discuss it, it will become easier. That's my advice.
Yeah, read Sustainable Hotel News. It has all the terminology on there. I think this discussion we had actually, we were talking about whether it was like whether we are ready to change as an industry, but also are people afraid of change? Do we want to? Do we want to say I'm not having a long shower anymore? You know, or is it just tough luck now? Move on, collect that data, get it in, and your brand will survive because you have, you know, done the right thing.
I think it's really hard.
But still, sorry, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, it's still an industry. We're supposed to. I mean, for some, it's a leisure activity. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's supposed to be nice. I mean, you don't want to have a shower every single morning thinking, oh, the polar bear is almost done. The polar bear is done. I got to get out. Got to get out. Go. You don't want to penalize it. You want to. So ultimately, the consumer is expecting the same type of experience as they had, let's say, before. Before we thought the climate was an important issue, let's say. So it's really up to the business to determine what they find important, how they want to do it, and indeed whether they choose for carbon emission, whether they choose for environmental elements, whether they go for logistics, food waste, seasonality, whether they go for social impact in terms of what they do for their direct environment around the hotel, what they do to connect with local community. There's so many different aspects of sustainability that trying to narrow it down to just a few criteria, that's not right. That's not how sustainability works.
No,
sustainability,
and it should be fun, like you
I mean,
said.
we have 17 SDGs. That's not because we thought it was fun to create 17. It's because you need all of these different specific criteria to think about. So trying to narrow it down just to one or two, that's
it's
not...
about
But this
working
is-
together.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is kind of philosophically what assessments should be doing. They shouldn't be saying do everything. Now, whether or not, let's for example say you're doing BREEAM in use for an operational asset, right? The point isn't that you're doing absolutely everything under the sun that you could put the name sustainability to. You have to look at your property. You have to look at the part of the world that you're in. Here, there isn't water scarcity like there is in the Middle East, for example, right? So doing things to
Felicity
decrease
shower
water
experience.
use, yeah, exactly. in the Middle East. Yeah, take a longer shower if you want.
Yeah.
It's fine. You know, so the promise of assessments is that you should know your asset, you should know your operation, you should see what all the kind of suite or menu of sustainable initiatives are, and based on your business plan, your goals, you should be selective because you can't do everything. Because let's not forget, sustainability is also being in the black, financially, making a profit. So if you can't afford it, it's not sustainable.
And we want the good ones to win,
Yeah, well,
don't we?
it's a balance.
Yeah, it is.
And it's a work in progress. Reporting is a snapshot in time. It's by no means you're done.
Yeah,
No, it's a
and then
constant.
you take the data and the insight that you have and you iterate. So
That's
you
right.
achieve one thing, you move to the next thing. But yeah, trying to do 17, goals at once isn't going to work. What 3 or 4 goals are right for you at your business at that point? Is it about equality and gender equality? Is it about inclusion, or is it about more environmental issues? Are you on a coastal region? Do you really need to, work on how you're using your water? Are you in South Africa where there's, restricted water anyway? It depends where you are in your journey, in your sustainability journey, but it also depends where you are in geographically and who your customers are and what they demand. So it has to be unique to your business as well.
It definitely has to be unique, doesn't it? It has to be something that works for you going for, like, to be sustainable going forward. I'm going to start closing this down a little bit. So I'm going to ask you a last question, and it's going to come back to the title, Who Cares Wins? Could each of you just say what the key point you would say to the hotel sector? What's the key to the success of managing that data? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first because I've repeated it probably a couple of times.
Okay.
I just think be transparent. Just whatever it is you're doing, make sure you're putting it out there. And don't be afraid of your numbers. Like I said, if you've got an old property that maybe is got a little bit of a leakage on that, energy and electricity, it doesn't matter. You've got character and you've got other initiatives like we talked about. And the last thing I'll say is I really don't want sustainability in this sort of space to be seen as things that are being reduced. It's not always about reducing water, reducing energy, reducing water. We still can create really creative ways. If you get creative, you can actually enhance the guest experience using sustainability and make some fun, interesting changes that enhances this experience. So just don't want you to think, if I put my data out there, people will think I'm not green. Be transparent.
Good.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, it's just I know you said be positive, Felicity, but we are very behind now as an industry. 2030 is right around the corner. There's a lot to achieve and accelerate in our industry. We all need to accelerate, and we need to take responsibility for our businesses and how we operate. So how can we accelerate? How can we skill up very quickly? How can we make sure that we're following the right programs and courses and having the right strategy and course correcting our strategies to be more sustainable? So my advice is just to start somewhere, start tomorrow, gather your team together, say, this is important, guys, let's sit down, because it's about your livelihoods in the future as well. It's about the existence of the industry going forward. There's no business on a dead planet. We have to get on board and do this today. So, but on a positive note, if anyone wants help doing that, then anyone listening today, if you want to chat a couple of hours, my time for free, there you go.
Cool.
We can do that.
Thijs?
My turn? I was trying to think on maybe in a different approach. I would say understand where you are as a business. Understand, for example, I'm now also involved with the municipal and governmental job description. Let's say I'm now policy advisor on the visitors economy for the municipality of Amsterdam. And what we also see is we see a lot of hostility between industries and businesses and governmental bodies. And I think governments and, and cities like Amsterdam, they want to have a better hotel industry. They want to be able to offer visitors a better city experience with, at one hand, a historical city center that we need to be very careful with and of. And we want an economic benefit of these visitors. And I think if hotels and governmental bodies can find each other rather than seeing how they are separate from another or different from one another, we're all looking for the same. Yeah. And the city needs these hotels, and the hotels needs a city that trusts them. And I think that's an element where we are currently weak. And I mean, we see it with different European cities, right? We're not the only European cities that's struggling.
Sure.
Florence, Rome, Tallinn, Krakow,
Venice,
Prague. It's all of this. We all have similar problems. And I think that's an element that needs a bit more attention.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to bring in. Thanks, Thijs. And finally, Bryan, the final word.
So I will leave you with this. It's possible that the more expert you are in hotels, the more difficult it will be for you to strategize what to do with sustainability. Ask yourself why you got into hotels in the first place. Talk to your staff. Talk to people who are not experts. Talk to children. Run your ideas by them. You'll be surprised what they come back with that you actually might think is a reasonable business practice to try. But so, in other words, if you're ever confused about where to begin or what's important, just champion best practice. In every industry, there's inherited wisdom over centuries, if not millennia. So take a step back, think about the bigger picture, match it with what you're trying to achieve, and don't be upset if it doesn't happen quickly. I'm always upset when I set a goal and it doesn't happen quickly, when it's organizational. You can only bring horses to water, right? Is that what they say? Yeah.
Yeah.
So champion best practice. That's what we need.
Great. That was a great one to end on. Thanks, guys. It's really interesting. I don't know if we've got time for questions. I don't think we have, because we were just talking so much. So thanks very much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the official opening of the Independent Hotel Show 2024, as we proudly present two globe-trotting hotel enthusiasts on a quest for